happy to have Kate Raworth here as our guest speaker today. And before introducing her, just a few words on the structure of this meeting. So I will give a brief introduction, then we will have Kate's talk, and then there will be the moment of the Q&A. Q&A not with me, but with you, people following on YouTube. So please, during and after the talk, ask your questions in the YouTube chat. And all the people you don't see here because they have their camera off, they will put the questions in the chat here or in Zoom, and I will be your voice, and I promise I will not abuse my power and ask the questions that I want to ask, okay? So our guest speaker today is, as again, Kate Raworth. She's been with the EoF actually already 2 times. I checked, one in 2020 for a talk, and also during our international event in Assisi in 2022, she connected. And so we remember clearly the talk. Currently, if I'm not wrong, she's a senior teaching fellow at Oxford University Environmental Change Institute, but also professor of practice here in the Netherlands at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And obviously, when you say Kate Raworth, the first thing that comes to mind now is Doughnut Economics, the famous book, and much more than a book that we all know and translated in more than 20 languages, even quoted by Pope Francis in a book that I think the title was Let Us Hope or something like that. It was mentioned there. And just a quick personal and even curious fact, we invited Kate Raworth as a speaker, I think in January, and she kindly agreed to be here with us today. And then we had a meeting to prepare this talk, and that meeting happened in May 8th, precisely in the afternoon, in which I remember I was with my phone with the screen of seeing if we had a new pope or not. So we were waiting for the black or white smoke. And we had that precise moment, the white smoke. I remember saying, oh, we have the new pope. We have a new pope. And this is particularly, I mean, important, or at least it had a meaning for me, because usually people say, oh, do you remember, where were you when the Pope was chosen and elected? And I say I was with Kate Raworth in a meeting, and also with Maria, but also because one of the most recurrent questions that we hear here in EoF for more than 1 month is what will happen now to the EoF, right? This is a question that we are asked a lot. And precisely that day, I went back to the invitation letter that Pope Francis sent to all of us in 2019, May 2019. It's a beautiful letter. And I noticed that that letter didn't and doesn't have an expiring date, right? So the Pope has always started a process. He wanted us to be the protagonist of this process. And so now there is also a kind of feeling of legacy, right, that we need to nurture, cultivate, and make flourish. We will have a big event in Castel Gandolfo in November for the EoF. And precisely also this lecture and the EoF School and all the EoF activities are our way to continue, right, this process. And so we are here today to be inspired, but also challenged from Kate's talk. And so without further ado, Kate, the floor is yours. So
Thank you so much, Paolo. What a lovely introduction. And yes, I remember that moment very vividly when we were talking. You said, there's the white smoke. It's lovely to hear that Pope Francis, his invitation to this initiative didn't have an expiry date. Today, I'm going to be talking about economic paradigms, which I wish did have an expiry date, because I'm going to be talking about how to escape outdated paradigms. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about Doughnut Economics as one way that we can all try to escape from outdated paradigms. So I'm sitting in my home office in the city of Oxford. I live here. I left Oxford for many years, but I came back to work for Oxfam. But I was a student in this city in the early 1990s. I came here to study economics, to learn the mother tongue of public policy, so I could help change the world. But I was really frustrated by the concepts that I was taught, and I'm going to share them with you now. What I call 20th century economics, because I think it is outdated, even though its power goes on. The first image that we are taught is supply and demand. It puts the market at the center of our vision on day one. Welcome to economics. Here is the market. And this has many effects. It means that we focus suddenly on markets as the medium of meeting our needs and wants, even though there are many other ways. It means that the price of something becomes the metric of concern, and suddenly economics is measured in prices. Anything that falls outside the price contract is called an externality, which means that if we want to talk about climate breakdown, ecological breakdown, economists call these environmental externalities. And for me, this alone is reason enough to rewrite the paradigm. There's no way we will look after this earth if we call her damage an environmental externality. The selfie of humanity, the portrait we make of ourselves, is the character of rational economic man. He would look something like this: a man standing alone, independent of all people, with money in his hand, ego in his heart, a calculator in his head, and nature at his feet, as if he was at the top of the pyramid of life. He hates work, he loves luxury, he knows the price of everything, and he can never get enough. And these are the characteristics given to humanity in the economic equations of the models of 20th century economics. If we continue to tell ourselves that this is who we are, I believe there is no chance of us thriving here together on this planet. Let me finish with the goal. What is the goal of the 20th century economy? It's never actively discussed because it's so deeply assumed it doesn't have to be. And it is growth, endlessly, no matter how rich a nation already is. Its economists and their politicians will tell you that the solution to its problems lies in yet more growth, measured in GDP. I'm sitting here in the UK, one of the richest countries in the history of humanity, like all high-income countries, and yet our politicians believe that the solution to our problems is more growth. To me, there is ultimately something insane in this. So these concepts profoundly underpin 20th century thinking and have led right through into the 21st century. And I think they are in many ways responsible for the way that the 21st century began, the first quarter of this century, with financial meltdown in 2007 and 8, COVID lockdown, climate breakdown, and crackdown against protesters who are rising up to stand with the earth. These crises emerge and are reported differently, but they all come from systems that are outdated. If we think finance can grow forever, it will create a bubble that will burst and cause a crash. If we continue to settle humanity into wildlife areas, coupled with endless increase in flights, we create perfect conditions for zoonotic disease transfer. If we continue to mine Earth's minerals and oil and fossil fuels and burn them, we create climate breakdown. So the very crises we have been enduring emerge from, I believe, the paradigm that misses so much of what matters. And I haven't even mentioned here the rise of authoritarianism, the breakdown of 21st century politics, the rise of militarism. Before 2025, we already thought we had enough on our plates, but the world has become more complex and more tense. And I believe we all the more need a paradigm that actually serves these times. This is why I wrote Doughnut Economics, out of frustration that the core issues that matter today are not being dealt with by the paradigms we've inherited. And so I set out 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. What really thrilled me when the book came out in 2017 was the reception it got. It was picked up by students, by communities, by governments. I was deeply honored that Pope Francis himself commended it, as Paolo just mentioned in his book, Let Us Dream. David Attenborough has mentioned it in his book. So it has got a lot of resonance with many, many different kinds of people. And that's been extraordinary for me because people actually started trying to put it into practice. And I'm going to share some of that today. But let me start by recognizing that Doughnut Economics is one form of what people often call new economics, where regenerative, well-being, a circular economy. We call these new economics. But I think it's really important to remember that they are actually touching back to economic insights that have long been held by indigenous communities around the world. In the phrase of the Maori scholar Shane Edwards, this is canoe economics. It was already known. And I love this play on words that just recognizes that Western ideas that we have been calling new economics are actually touching something that's been long, long known in many other cultures. and we are reconnecting with something long-standing and deep. I feel myself on a Western economic mindset recovery program, moving back towards a longer held deep insight. So let me show you with the donut. The donut I offered as a compass for 21st century prosperity. The aim is to leave nobody in the hole, in the middle, falling short on the essentials of life, when people lack the resources they need. That is a space of lacking human rights. So we want to get people over the social foundation to meet their rights to food, water, health, education, housing, income. These 12, I crowdsourced them from the Sustainable Development Goals, so the world's governments have already agreed with this. But we also need to make sure we don't go beyond the outer ecological ceiling. And these are the 9 planetary boundaries, the life-supporting systems that make life work on this planet. So the goal is to be in the green space between the two, to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. This becomes the goal instead of growth. If this is the goal, then what kind of economic mindset would give us even half a chance of getting there? And if this is the goal, it's about thriving in balance, finding health for planetary thriving. We are very far from that balance right now, as all of the red in this image shows. Billions of people falling short on life's essentials in the hole in the middle. We want to eliminate all of that red in the middle. But at the same time, we have to come back within these planetary boundaries that have already been transgressed. So this is a completely different starting point to last century's economics. Last century's economic theorists didn't see this picture. Why would we expect their theories to address it? Last century's government policies were not designed with this in mind. Last century's business models were not designed with this. Last century's lifestyles and the aspirations of what we each think is a good life were not created in light of this realization. So we need to start again with this as our founding context. What then are theories that serve us? Policies, business designs, lifestyles, community action that serve us, given this is our reality of today. How do we be the generation that starts to turn this story around? I'm showing you the donut at the global level, but of course there are huge variations in context and responsibility between nations. So here are just 4 countries. And this is from a website, goodlife.leeds.act.uk. You can see in the corner, if you want to look up your own country. On one end, we've got Malawi, massive human shortfall without overshooting their share of the planetary boundaries. Brazil, significant human shortfall, significant ecological overshoot. China, also a double whammy challenge. And the US, look how rich the US is compared to Malawi, like over 50 times richer. High inequality domestically within the country and massive ecological overshoot. So all of these countries are on a journey of transformation. Let me put these 4 now in a scatter plot of over 50, illustrating the spread across the world. The place where every country should aim to be is in the top left-hand corner, that green donut. That is where countries rise up to meet the needs of all people, but they do so coming back within the planetary boundaries. So first, you notice there's not a single country that's there. Costa Rica is closer than any other. Second, I invite you next time you hear yourself or somebody else talking about developed countries, you can say, I'm very sorry, but I don't know what you mean. There's not a single country in this picture that should be calling itself developed. There's just nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. You're destroying the integrity of the living world, and you're definitely undermining the chances of lower income countries to meet the needs of all their people. These are the 4 countries I showed you just before, spread across the whole range. And let's recognize that even though countries stand like separate dots on the chart, they are profoundly interconnected. From histories of colonialism, I say this as a British person sitting in the UK, I have to recognize the history of my country in relation to so many of yours. Military power, corporate power, trade and finance rules, resource extraction, and current and future impacts of climate change. We are deeply interconnected as countries. Now, the history of pursuing growth of GDP generally takes countries in this direction, first up towards the donut, but instead of going into it, straight past that corner. So just going for growth does not take us there. These are the actual data of countries since 1992 to 2015. You can see the vast majority of countries are curving round that corner. In the words of the systems thinker Donella Meadows, she says, when anyone calls for growth, you always should ask, growth of what? And why? And for whom? And who pays the cost? And how long can it last? And what's the cost to the planet? And how much is enough? So instead of going for growth, what if we actually went for the donut itself? What if instead nations were clustered like this? The low-income countries, can they rise up to meet the needs of all their people without overshooting planetary boundaries as all before them have done? Can middle-income nations reorient, like China, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, Iran? Can they meet the needs of their people? They have a long way to go and already come back within planetary boundaries. And can high-income countries like the one I'm in massively reduce their overshoot while finally meeting the needs of all their people? They surely have the resources to do so. And to do this between countries will take a major rebalancing. What does that rebalancing mean? For some, it means reparations. For some, it is return of stolen land or redistribution of wealth or technology, renegotiation of trade and finance rules, rebalancing global institutional power. It will take a major rebalancing. For me, this image is the map of directionality that I see as the goal for the 21st century. It's complex. It will be bumpy. But I ask myself against every policy, is this direction we're going in or not? What would take us there? And what would be the mindset that you would teach if you wanted to equip today's young economic students with even half a chance of getting us there? So for me, I would never start with supply and demand. I would start with this diagram, the biggest picture of the economy. It recognizes that the economy is a subset of society. The economy is embedded in social systems of law, culture, media, customs, and is bounded by social acceptance and norms. But human society itself is embedded in the living world. We are part of nature, embedded in and utterly dependent upon all other living systems. And the earth is bathed in the sunlight of the sun, right? The solar energy coming in and the waste heat going out. We draw in matter and material, we put out waste and pollution. So the economy needs to be designed in a way that is aligned with, compatible with conditions of life on Earth. Now that already is a ground-shaking change to the economics that I was taught and is taught still today in the vast majority of universities. If we started with this, the economy is bounded by life, then all the theories would have to change. They would have to change all the textbooks. The professors would need to reskill because we can no longer talk about anything as an externality. The economy is deeply embedded in life and utterly dependent upon it. We can also look inside the economy itself and see, yes, there's the market, supply and demand. And usually students learn about the market and the state. You know, if you don't trust the market, step in. But then do you trust the state? Market failure, state failure. The market and the state on that horizontal, these show up in GDP. But in the battle between the market and the state, we miss two other fundamental forms of provisioning. The household, where we all begin every day, with the cooking, the washing, the cleaning, the sweeping, raising the children. Do it all again tomorrow. This is the space that makes life work. It's essential for care, but it's missing from GDP. And then also there's the commons, where people come together to collaborate, to co-create value, often with no money changing hands. So we need to bring in this vertical as well, because this is so much of what makes life work and makes it worthwhile. So this, to me, if the donut is a compass, this is the map. How do we create an economy embedded in society, embedded in the living world? And just in the spirit of the economy of Francesco, an economy that respects social and human values, that respects the living world. This, to me, is deeply aligned with the economy of Francesco. We also need to change the deep dynamics of our economies. We've inherited linear degenerative economies that take, make, use, and lose Earth's resources. This pushes us over planetary boundaries. We need to bend the arrows around in a circular or cyclical economy, separating biological materials from technical materials. What could this look like? Here are just some examples from very different parts of the world in the context of urban design. building houses with locally made materials, which at the end of their life will literally return into the earth as part of living systems. Or circular construction in Amsterdam, materials that have been used and can be used again. Retrofitting. People say the best building is the one that already exists. So retrofitting instead of always rebuilding. And the sponge city, recognizing that any settlement is embedded in Earth's ecosystems, so should be able to absorb flood water rather than be flooded by it. So from degenerative to regenerative design. But also, we've inherited economies that tend to be divisive, capturing opportunity in value in the hands of a few. This leads to the rise of a 1%, whether in a nation or globally, and we are seeing it supercharged today. An insane level. The richest 1% of people own half of the world's wealth. There is no way we can get into the donut with such inequality. We need to create distributive economies that share value and opportunity far more equitably between all who co-create it. What could that look like in urban design? City of Vienna, most people live in social housing that is affordable, central, normal, good quality, because the city decided 100 years ago that housing is not a luxury investment asset, it's a human right. So they would own the housing stock to serve that end. These half houses in Chile, you build half a house, people can afford to buy just half a house, and then when they've saved up enough money, they fill the other half in themselves. Whether it's about transport, buses with a dedicated bus lane to make the ordinary person's travel the effective, affordable, smart option. And who's going to have the jobs as the new economy arrives, the high-skilled jobs? Here in Cleveland, they have made sure that young Black men who were traditionally marginalized from good job opportunities are at the heart of that skilling up. So from degenerative to regenerative and from divisive to distributive. I have given you a whirlwind tour of some of the concepts of 20th century economics. This is what we left behind, and we can replace it with 21st century economics that embeds the economy in the living world, that sees us as part of life and recognizes we humans are deeply social, the most social of all mammals. And the goal is to get into the donut. So these are the concepts I published in Doughnut Economics in 2017. And what was really thrilling for me is that people just started to do it. I'm going to talk about what happened in the context of local governments in cities. It was the city of Amsterdam that first said, we want to aim to live in the donut and bring it to the heart of our circular strategy. So they created a circular orange donut for the Netherlands. And they said, we're going to be 100% circular economy by 2050 here in Amsterdam. The donut is our guide. 6 weeks after they did that, the city of Copenhagen voted with a big majority, we're going to explore what's happening in our city through the lens of the donut. Then also Brussels, then Barcelona. At the beginning, I thought, is this literally going to happen alphabetically? Are we going to go A, B, C, D, E? It's going to take a long time. But no, they broke out. Suddenly, over 50 and now 100 cities and towns and districts around the world are using the donut in their processes. Here's just a selection of them. And I'm going to just illustrate for you what they're actually doing. So governments are putting it into practice in their policies, in their vision, in their strategies, taking a range of different approaches. And we've started bringing them together. This was last October. People from 25 cities around the world came together, learning from each other. And that's the beauty of it. They are learning from each other, peer-to-peer inspiration. So in Barcelona, the city created their own local version of the donut, gathered local data, and are using it towards creating a culture of sustainability in the city. There's fantastic things happening in Barcelona. You see the picture at the top, streets full of trees. Those streets used to be full of traffic jams. They took out the cars and put in trees and brought in not only ecological generosity, coolness, wildlife, but they brought in community and reconnection. So that's the city of Barcelona. The city of Ipoh in Malaysia, they're aiming to be the first city in Asia that aims to get into the donut. And they are likewise making a portrait of the city through that lens, adapting the donut to their reality, a middle-income country in Asia, asking how do we then use this as a tool for the transformation we need to make here. And likewise in Bhutan, the government of Bhutan said, we see a lot of connection between the donut and our concept of gross national happiness. So we want to put the two together and use them in our planning and thinking about creating a new vision for the city of Thimphu, the capital. And I love the cartoons that are here on the right, drawn by a Bhutanese artist, imagining the country in a few decades' times. What is a good life? Again, we must imagine positively what is a good life here and how can we move towards that? If anyone's interested in this, it's all summarized in a fantastic report written by my colleague, Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started. And she's documented the many different ways that different places around the world are getting started. How do you move from an outdated paradigm into this one? How do you get started? There are also regions, community groups around the world getting started. So community networks, Doughnut Brazil, or in Cambridge, or in Berlin, or Mexico, all around the world at the level of a city, sometimes at the level of a nation. Let me give you one example. In Melbourne, in Australia, the city suffered terrible wildfires, then COVID, then wildfires. And people there said, this is just disastrous. There has to be another way. And it was in that crisis, in the despair, that they then turned to the donut as a positive vision and took it and made their own donut for Melbourne. And now use it at the heart of their envisioning. What if the Yarra River running through the centre of Melbourne was swimmable? It's not right now. That's a Photoshop image, but it's their dream. What if we had food growing in the streets? What if we could rebuild community in our streets? So the donut is part of a multi-act vision for remaking Melbourne. So these are strong and positive examples, but I want to talk about the challenge of what if we feel we're getting stuck? We've got regions and cities and schools and communities and businesses and nations aiming to move towards the donut, but it's not a straight and easy road. There's policies and regulations and politics and money that gets in the way. There's inertia and a lack of funding and burnout and geopolitical pressures. And then journalists come and say, please take me to a place that's already living in the donut. Show me the visible results that you've already achieved. How can you show me? How can you be sure that this new economic vision is really going to work? And why isn't it all happening faster? So I want to reflect on that a moment, because it's really difficult to escape from outdated paradigms. They're very powerful. They have us caught. So here are some reflections for anybody who's working on issues that you feel sometimes you're getting stuck. How can we motivate ourselves and think? Well, people have got stuck before. 1947, in a Swiss village called Montpellier, Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and a group of economists got together and they had a dream. Their dream was neoliberal economics. It wasn't the economics of the day. People were practicing Keynesian, government-led economics. Milton Friedman wanted to create an economic revolution. And he said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function: to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. Well, Milton won in the end. Or it wasn't the end, but Milton won after several decades because his policies were introduced first in Chile under General Pinochet, and then by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher on the international stage in the US and the UK in 1980. And his ideas really, and neoliberalism has dominated the world ever since. So let's not forget that this too had to campaign for itself and had to overturn outdated views. It can happen again. There can be more than one economic revolution. They did this by seeding foundations, by big money from big corporations who would win from this, by creating chairs and professorships in universities, by putting the information all around so that it seemed like it was just common knowledge. So we ask ourselves, what if our ideas were not just lying around, but they were up and running with proof of practice? We don't have the money of the corporations behind us to make such big think tanks. But we do have people who are choosing to put these ideas into practice on the ground where they are. So we amplify their voices and make visible, look, this is already happening. These are governments. Nobody's paying them to do this work. They have chosen these ideas as the best fit for the transformation that they already know they want to bring about. Donella Meadows, the mother of systems thinking I quoted earlier on growth, she talked a lot about changing paradigms. She says, how do you change paradigms? You keep pointing at the anomalies and the failures of the old one. You keep speaking and acting loudly and with assurance from the new one. You insert people with the new paradigm in places of public visibility and power. You don't waste time with reactionaries. You work with active change agents and with the vast middle ground of people who are open-minded. And so we ask ourselves, and we remind ourselves that every time one of us in the community, the big community of people sharing Doughnut Economics, a schoolgirl drawing her own diagram, somebody on a stage in a community center, every time we share these images and concepts, we may be changing somebody else's worldview. Howard Zinn was a brilliant historian who wrote The People's History of the United States, and he pointed out that the leaps that man has made in social evolution come from people who acted as if I just know not only that this is going to happen, that we're going to win, but in many ways we have already won. We are already in the future we dream of. Here in the UK, we look very much to the suffragettes, the women who campaigned for women's right to vote. They got carried away by the police, lifted off, and they said, we are not here to break the law. We are here to make the law. But they held themselves with a dignity, knowing that they would win. We think of Gandhi on his Salt March in the 1930s, the dignity with which he carried himself in a way that the British Empire just did not know what to do with, because he knew that ultimately the British would leave. He told them, you will leave. You will leave my country. He carried with himself and behaved as if he were already in that future. In the United States in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, brave young people of color sat at a counter where they would be told they did not belong because they were the wrong color, but they sat there anyway, knowing that in the words of Martin Luther King, the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice. But they did this before. So these people, I think, are such deep inspiration. So the question we can ask ourselves, what does it mean for us today to act as if we too will succeed? The Economy of Francesco, Doughnut Economics, new economic thinking, canoe economic thinking, regenerative and distributive visions for the future, that we will succeed in overturning paradigms that do not serve us. How, therefore, should we hold ourselves? How should we speak and engage? I find this a beautiful question. Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to be elected to US Congress. And so she knows a thing or two about being excluded. And she said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. I love this quote. And we can ask ourselves, okay, what kind of folding chair can I bring? Can I also set up my own festival, write my own newspaper, create our own awards, hold a different party, a better party? How can we make our voice heard, even if formal power doesn't recognize it? And again, I think this is a powerful question. And then the last one I give you, the chemist Ilya Prigozhin, who said, when a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. So there are many small islands. I've already mentioned some of them. Doughnut Economics is in some ways its own little island. Economy of Francesco is its own little island. Regenerative economy, circular economy, well-being economics. Are we going to be islands, or are we going to connect up? This is why I'm here today, to connect, to say that we are just slightly different ways into something deeply shared. We are offered different portals in for different communities, but when they come in, we must show them the connections between, because we are so much stronger when we connect up these islands. And so I want to finish by connecting back to the new economics and the canoe economics. These ideas, old and new, from the West and from the global majority. It is time for them to connect. It is time for us to see within Economy of Francesco, within Doughnut Economics and all these ideas, the connection of regenerative design, of distributive design, that we can stand and hold our space knowing that this is the paradigm that makes life work on earth, that brings dignity to people, and brings respect and integrity to the living world. So how do we hold ourselves and speak to this change paradigm so that we can finally break away from outdated paradigms that do not deserve to hold us? So let me finish here and say, if these ideas are of interest to you, I warmly welcome you to check out our website, doughuteconomics.org. You can join the community. You can just browse the tools and resources. They are all in the commons. We share everything openly. We ask only that people reciprocate by sharing back what you've learned or sharing back the adaptations you've made, because this, we know, is how we evolve. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate, for the energetic also talk. I really enjoyed, and I see that already in the chat there are questions, so people ask questions on YouTube. I will just go in order, right? So that it's kind of fair. So
Yeah.
the first question is the following. It starts like, how can we truly decolonize education? The Economy of Francesco School, so this and Academy, that is the group of our researchers, offer promising example, as well as the ones that you, Kate, mentioned earlier. Yet, recent events and institutions like Harvard reveal the deep challenges that remain. What concrete steps can we take to move forward? You think the ripple effects of small group can be enough? Pope Francis underlined urgency, and it weighs on us young people. Yeah, true. Can we realistically change curricula, and if so, how? So big questions.
Wonderful big question. Yes. So we already had the challenge of decolonizing education, which has been rising, I would say. Certainly, I've felt it in institutions that I teach in for the last 10 years. And I really want to start by acknowledging and congratulating students over the last couple of decades for really bringing this to the fore. Again, in the universities, I know it has come from the students. Now, it shouldn't have to be that way round, right? The students have come to study. They're often taking out a loan. They're dedicating their life to study. And what they often find, as with the economics itself, they find when they arrive that the first thing they have to do is lobby to change the curriculum.
Yeah.
That's not the way it should have to be. So kudos and respect to the students who have brought these issues to the fore. But I think it's upon every teacher and every professor. There's an uncomfortable moment when you realize that what you're teaching is what you taught, right? We are inheritors of the academic, the intellectual traditions, and professors often are just passing it on, and that it's not adequate. It's not enough. You're going to have to go outside of your comfort zone, outside of everything you know, outside of what you read. You're going to have to look deep into your own positionality. What does it mean to be a white Western person from the global North, privileged? How do I bring that into my teaching? How do I acknowledge that? So big questions that previously professors, academics, and universities were never asked to look at themselves in this way. And each of us, were never asked to look at ourselves in this way. I think it's one of the most profound and exciting and important changes that's happened, certainly in my own experience of this generation, is to learn to see our own whiteness and to see the white supremacy that has been coming from the global North, unaware of itself, and to remove the glasses, to remove the scales from the eyes, and to learn to see it. But that's a big journey for people. So I think there's a big psychology in people what shall I read? How do I begin to see myself? And then also, once I start to see that, what then do I teach? How is my subject colonized? I mean, in what way does mainstream economics need to be decolonized? Again, I want to salute the students and the young graduates who have put this at the heart of their work and gone back to original texts and looked at the historical context in which many economic ideas were drawn up. I often point out that the founding fathers of economics, well, they were all men. They were founding fathers. So there's a gender angle there. No wonder they missed the unpaid caring economy. But they were also all white men from the global North. And they were well-off men, which is why they were able to sit around and write down economic theories. So there's a class angle to it. So there's huge implications in who gets to be an economist. And I also want to say it's really important to see the diversity of people who now identify as being economists, because each person, whether it's on gender or race or global North, majority world, or class terms, none of us can see our 360 degrees. We're all subject to our own positionality. So when we learn from others who help us see what we can't see. I want to also acknowledge that the Rethinking Economics movement, which is an international student movement, are doing really good work around this and encouraging this. And I've been working very closely with them, putting Doughnut Economics into their realm. So it's an ongoing task, and I'm really glad that this was the first question. It's at the heart of overcoming outdated paradigms.
And that's exactly just to follow up. Our first edition of the EoF School was called Rethinking Economics, starting from the commons. So the idea, if we can do the courses of microeconomics, when you have just one or two lectures on the commons or public,
Yes,
and all on the private goods as where you were.
yes,
But
love
then I
it.
apologize that I have the cup of Adam Smith. That's precisely I'm
Well,
sorry.
Adam Smith wasn't such a bad guy.
No, indeed.
He was a man of his time. I think if
Yeah,
he was alive today, he would be totally shocked that
yeah.
people 250 years later still think his ideas. I mean, if he was alive today, he would see the world as it is today, and he would theorize differently. So why are we using his old books?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I need to start now to move to the last question because then in private I've been told that there was a reverse. That
Okay.
is from Bruno Petrusic. That he says, I have a question for Kate. What is the difference, if any, between growth and progress? And does it make any sense within the economic context?
Oh my goodness, yes. There is an enormous difference between growth and progress. Let me just see. Thank you for this question, Bruno. I'm going to go back to, I'm just going to share my slide back again because I love pictures and I think they help us. And I'm going to go back here. So this is where some countries are. And as I said, growth was taking them in this direction, right? So as countries grow in terms of GDP per capita, they generally move in this direction. You can see that. Now, because we hadn't looked at countries through this lens before, through the donut lens, we've been talking about countries making economic progress, right? If I said, oh, this country's made real economic progress, somebody would think it meant GDP had gone up, GDP per capita. But look, the countries with the highest GDP capita, look at the United States, Canada, and Australia. These are three of the richest countries in the world. They're way over planetary boundaries. We know too much about our utter dependence upon the healthy planet to continue talking about growth as a sufficient goal. And I'm also going to do one little trick with a piece of hose pipe. Hang on.
Yeah.
Because just let's step back and think about growth. And so I'm not going to not talk about GDP. I'm just going to think about growth. It's a very deeply rooted metaphor, especially in the Western mindset, right? So here's the shape of growth, right? That's the exponential growth curve that we very got used to. When something's growing like that, we love our kids growing, our plants growing, because it tells us it's alive, right? Growth is a wonderful, healthy phase of life, but it's just a phase. Nothing living succeeds by keeping on growing like this. It's literally gone through the ceiling. Things that thrive, they grow like this, right? They grow initially, they go through that growth curve, but then they flatten out. And this is nature's growth. If you think of anything in nature, a plant, a swarm of ants, bacteria in a dish, the human population is growing like this. It's not growing like that. It's growing like this. It's flattening out. So growth is just a phase. And I think it has to just be a phase of our economies too. We've inherited economies that think they have to keep going like this. They're addicted to endless growth. And I think the economic existential question and challenge of this century is how to move from economies that need and depend upon endless growth to economies that can actually thrive without growth. This is called the post-growth economic position, and Doughnut Economics is part of that. So we need to get over our addiction to endless growth. It's been written into the heart of our economic design, the need for growth. Otherwise, we have a recession and everything crashes. We need to take the addiction to growth out of the heart of our economy. So yes, progress to me is overcoming the addiction to growth right now. It's very different. I love the question. And yes, they're very different in my mind.
Yeah, and to follow up, there is another question, but this time I really like this kind of question. Margherita Casao asked, if you could choose one policy measure to put in practice at the global level, what would that be? What? Just
So
one.
I tend not to think in terms of policy measures. Because the work I do is much more at the paradigm level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I really want to do, okay, if I could have one policy measure, I would say I want the world's governments to meet at a table that has the donut in the center of it. I want them to sit around the edges of this table, and every meeting they have, and the world's financial ministers as well, as they sit around this table, they have to show how the policies that they are advocating, or the conventions they're drawing up, or the negotiations they're making, how it will contribute to getting the donut. And maybe actually they should do this one, because here, from all the red, we can actually see the people who are falling short on life's essentials. They should have to justify their policies in terms of how it's going to help these people and how it's going to bring us back within this planet. At the moment, because they don't sit around a donut table, they invisibly sit around an economic growth table. And so they talk about economic growth. We need to get the global economy growing. So they are focusing on the wrong goal.
Okay, good. So there is another question. This covers up something that has already been said, but maybe Diana Villagran, she asked, what will be the first steps to convince the government, again, to acquire the Doughnut Economics vision to safeguard tropical spaces like the Galapagos Island?
Oh,
Pacific. What would it take?
Thank you for this question. So in my experience, the best way that we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab have so far found is to work with local governments and national governments that want to work with these concepts. We work with them. So what we don't do is we don't knock on shut doors. We don't go around saying, oh, you should listen, because that puts you in a place of no power, and those behind the door can say, no, thank you, not today.
Yeah.
I don't want to use my life energy like that. So what we do is we work with the places, the governments, the local governments or national governments that get in touch with us and say, oh, we really like this concept. We want to do it. Great. Let's go. We will demonstrate it, right? We will show this ideas up and running, not just lying around, but up and running, because there are islands that are using it. In fact, there's about to be published an article exactly around applying the donut to island nations.
Okay,
Precisely so that it can be used, because islands have a very strong affinity with this. It's like, we're an island. We used to be self-sufficient. I have good friends in Hawaii, indigenous scholars there, who say, hey, we're the most remote islands in the world. We were once a regenerative, self-contained circular economy. It's only through colonization by the United States that we've been drawn into this extractive linear economy. So there will soon be published a paper before next month, actually, about the island economies and how Doughnut economics can be applied there.
That's good. Yes, that's very, very informative. Now I take just 1 minute for abusing my power because you showed us, because in one slide I clearly saw there was a reference and you mentioned to SDGs, right?
Yes.
The Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
We are in 2025.
Yes.
2030 is very
close.
It's close, right? Do you have any thoughts about how I don't know if we need new goals, if we need to continue with those, and how that kind of change will be related also to your...
Yes. And before the SDGs, we had the MDGs, right?
Yes,
we had the Millennium Development Goals, and we got a bit of a way towards some of them, but then we replaced them with the SDGs, and here we are again, coming close. And I've seen people writing journal articles already saying, what we need are some new goals, and we'll just remake the goals. So the donut is a goal, right? It's quite similar to the SDGs in many ways. These are very related. And the SDGs say eliminate deprivation here, and start to come back within planetary boundaries. But I published the donut in 2012, and it was very clear to me that it had a lot of power and traction, but it's not enough. It's not enough just to say, oh yeah, let's have this goal. Because if you're still working with an outdated paradigm, you may have a new goal, but if all the other ideas are the same, and you haven't changed any institutions and you haven't changed any power relations, how are you going to get there? That's why I wrote Doughnut Economics with all of the 7 ways to think. So for me, it starts at the paradigm change. We need to, here we are, right? If you want that goal and you're still looking at supply and demand, you're not going to get there. You need to embed the economy in society and the living world. To me, if we raise a generation of economists on this concept, they are thinking differently from day one.
Mhm.
If we bring in systems thinking and recognize the feedback loops and the interconnectedness of everything rather than the static supply and demand, we
Mhm.
start to change the way of thinking. If we recognize we need the pattern we need in the world is not growth, it's regenerative design, it's distributive design. If we unhook ourselves from endless growth. So to me, these paradigm changes in the mind come and they lead people to come up with then policies that could actually start moving us in different directions. Now,
Mhm.
that's also still easier than said than done, because there are massive power forces and political pressures in the world that are drawing us away from the SDGs, because there's geopolitical competition between nations that's rising up, a remilitarization
Mhm.
that is taking much energy and money and attention away from the SDGs. So of course it's more than a paradigm.
Mhm.
But it's not surprising to me that we haven't made it to the SDGs. You need to change more than the goal. You need to change the deep ways of thinking, and you need to change the power
Mhm.
but relations between places.
Basic. Okay, now we have the time for the last question that
Okay.
is very appropriate because I think it asks you again. So by Genesis Kelly Lontok, and I guess she asked, can Doughnut Economics thrive under the dominant neoliberal mindset in the world today? It should be a yes or no
Ooh.
answer, but
Can Doughnut Economics thrive
yeah.
under the dominant neoliberal mindset today? It's a great, great, great question. No, of course it can't. It can start, it can try, and that's exactly what we're doing. And that's all the examples I showed you of towns and cities that are getting started. And what I love about the examples I showed you is that these are local governments who've been elected, and they are getting started and they are trying. But they're also part of a nation they don't have control over all the laws and regulations they need to control. They're part of a national system,
Mhm.
and their nation is part of a region. And the region is part of the world, and it's shaped by the global financial system and global geopolitics. So there's huge forces pushing down on them.
Mhm.
And yet, hang on, let me demo this. Huge forces pushing down on them, and yet they start. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to get started. And it gives me joy, because I see that people in places, whether they're teachers or in a company or in a community or in a government, they see all the forces and all the reasons not to do it and all the reasons why we'll be overwhelmed by the pressures of the world. And they say, yep, we're going to start. We're just going to start, because that's what I'm here to do with my life. And I see it as a commitment that people have, this just determination. So donut economics cannot fully thrive in a neoliberal world. No way. Donut economics is precisely a project to replace Milton Friedman's neoliberal dream with a different paradigm. And it will thrive when we have replaced the very outdated neoliberal paradigm with one which is much more fitting for our times.
Excellent. I think that this is a great end, and I should not say anything more to Ruth now. But let me thank you for the talk, the dialogue, and also something we notice with these lectures that we record on YouTube. They become really, I don't know if common or public goods, but because they stay there. And I heard that in some places in the world are even used in some courses, right?
Wow,
And
wonderful.
that's yeah, it's something that we really appreciate. Anyway, thanks a lot. And please know that Economy of Francesco is always open, for you and
Likewise.
yeah. So it's really, and I watched yesterday to prepare myself, right, for
Yes.
this moment. I watched the other two talks, right, and it's always the same but never the same, and this is
Uh-huh.
wonderful. It was not just I think a repetition, so that I really
It's
like
evolving.
about this.
Thank you, Paolo, and thank you everybody. And it's really lovely to connect here. I feel great warmth and solidarity and fraternity with the Economy of Francesco. As I said, we are all slightly different portals connecting into something profoundly connected. So with this concept that has no expiry date, let us overturn expired paradigms together. Thank you so
Yes,
much. It's been a real
thanks,
pleasure
thanks
to
a
join
lot.
you.
Thank you. And for
Thank
all
you.
the others, before our Enrique send again the jingle, because he asked me, can I send again the jingle of the conference? We have the normal lecture, the lectorials of the school, because these are special lectures. The lectorials are more interactive on YouTube, are a bit more experimental. because we see, Kate, that the people who subscribe for the EoF School, they also want to be active, like in this
Yeah,
moment, asking questions. These will start again in July. So we will have another lectorial in July, probably one in August and September, and then we will have another guest lecture before the event in November. In October, we will have Esther Duflo, that
wonderful.
yes, so we try to trace a line and be inspired. Okay, I will not
Wonderful.
steal much time. Thanks again. Wonderful to meet you. Let's keep in touch and
Yes,
goodbye
thank
to
you so
everyone.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.